a community on the rise, filled with people looking to make a great life for themselves.
He was nice to everyone. He was very generous to his family, beloved by all.
When Eric loses contact with everyone in his life, his friends and family are quick to grow concerned.
He had not spoken to family in 2 days.
That was just highly unusual.
But for him, it's already too late. Silver Spring, Maryland, is a community located just north of Washington, D.C.
It was really up and coming. A lot of clubs, a lot of bars, a lot of brand new high-rise houses and apartment buildings, condominiums. It's a much younger crowd, a much more urban crowd, lots of metro access, lots of jobs available, very close to D.C., so it's a very sought-after area.
It's a very diverse community. It's kind of an urban area, even though we are a suburban community. It is literally only maybe a block and a half outside of the District of Columbia. It was a very trendy area.
Eric Samoa was charismatic. That was the #1 word that a lot of people use to describe Eric. He worked at a luxury dealership in Bethesda, and he was a smooth talker. He was funny. He was the person everybody wanted to be around. He was the #1 salesman at their dealership. He was the first one in. He was always the last one to leave. Everybody loved him.
Eric Simone was 34 years old. He was beloved by friends and coworkers. Eric made somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 a month. He was a ladies' man. He was nice to everyone. He was very generous to his family, beloved by all. He was the kind of guy that kept contact with just about everybody that was part of his life, family and friends. He was very attentive to his customers, which led to his success in business. And, he was a very popular guy.
Eric is living it up. He has great relationships, an incredible job, and lives in style.
Apartment complex was one with a brand new facility surrounded by $750,000 condominiums to $1 million condominiums. Lots of shopping and dining you could walk to in this particular area. The building itself was very fancy. It had an indoor pool and workout facilities.
In spring of 2012, everyone in Eric's life suddenly loses all contact with him.
So at that point, on June 6th of 2012, Eric had not shown up for work, and that was, of course, unusual for Eric. His manager was concerned. He had not spoken to family in 2 days. Eric was always very involved with his family. He talked with his sister, his friends a lot, and that was concerning to them that there was 2 days where basically he was unavailable.
And this is somebody who lived with his cell phone. It was absolutely essential to all of his personal relationships and the way he conducted his business. That's how he reached out to his customers. His phone went dead. That was just highly unusual. The work people were so concerned, they contacted his family and talked to his mom and his sister. And one of his sisters ultimately called Montgomery County Police and requested that the police do what we call a welfare check. Can you please go to the apartment, check to see if he's okay? They got together with the landlord who gave him the key.
Calling the police is usually thought of as something strictly for worst-case emergencies, but sometimes we're needed just to come into a situation and make sure everything's okay. A welfare check is something that can be critical when a person lives alone and suddenly loses contact.
When they went to the apartment, the first thing police noticed was a really awful smell. And Eric's apartment, though very luxurious in a high-rise, was small. So when they came in the front, you kind of immediately see this bedroom to the side. And that's where Eric's body was found, in bed, virtually looking undisturbed. All the lights off, the blinds shuttered. And Eric was actually hands tucked under his chin, his sheet tucked under between his hands, just as if he was peacefully sleeping. But obviously the police noticed that there was a bullet hole in his head. Initially, police thought that it was a suicide.
While police are conducting their welfare check in Eric's apartment, his family is down in the lobby waiting on news. By the time they are told what is happening, the investigation is leaning toward the theory that Eric has committed suicide.
That was the initial information that was relayed to his family. They were absolutely horrified by the suggestion that that was what would happen. They said he would never do that.
The initial theory that Eric must have committed suicide doesn't last very long after the scene of the crime is more thoroughly investigated.
That was backtracked on very quickly because the officers obviously conspicuously saw that there was no gun.
This was not a suicide. It was a homicide.
There was one shell casing found on the bed. It was a spent shell casing from a .380. No gun was located.
The medical examiner conducts an autopsy to confirm cause of death and look for any other possible forensic evidence which could help steer the investigation.
The mechanism for death in this case was a gunshot wound. The gunshot wound was to the high part of the front of his head, the temple. It appeared to be an execution, essentially, to us and to the police. And there was also a bullet that was recovered at the time of the autopsy inside of Eric's body.
There is very limited evidence at the crime scene, leaving ballistic evidence as the only lead to follow.
There appears to have been nothing stolen, nothing ransacked, so it also appeared that whoever got into his apartment was someone that he let in there. They didn't break in, and they apparently didn't come to steal anything because they didn't take anything.
With no apparent sign of theft or disruption to the apartment, we're left to believe that whoever is responsible is likely someone Eric knows, someone he's close enough with that they either have their own key or he's comfortable with them spending the night.
With little else to go on, the police are left with only a .380 bullet shell to bring Eric's killer to justice. But will it be enough? Silver Spring, Maryland, is an up-and-coming community just north of Washington, D.C. Great for young professionals to build their lives. Eric 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗍𝗿 is a successful car salesman, known for keeping in touch with everyone close to him and never having his phone too far from reach.
When Eric hasn't been heard from for 2 days straight, his family calls the police to do a welfare check, leading to the discovery that he has been murdered.
Later on in the investigation, it was very quickly realized that Eric's phone was missing. That was the only thing that was missing from the apartment, and there were valuables all around, his wallet, a watch. The only thing missing was the phone.
Eric's missing phone is considered especially curious because he's known for keeping in touch with everyone close to him. His lack of communication is exactly what tipped off his family and led them to have the police check on him. Why wouldn't his phone be in his apartment? Has whoever killed him taken it?
So at that point, the police, I think their first line of attack was Eric's life through that cell phone. They didn't have the phone. They were able to very quickly get cell phone records. And they were able to see when Eric was texting messages, where the phone was. They were looking for the phone's location. The phone was ultimately never found. And throughout those records, they were able to identify the people that Eric was in contact with on the last days of his death. Most of them were friends and family. Most of them were people that had reached out to the police that were concerned about the investigation and asking questions. The police, though, did quickly realize that there was one number that kind of kept coming up over and over again. It was a Mississippi number. And his family didn't know that he knew anyone from Mississippi.
The police focus on trying to identify the owner of this Mississippi number from Eric's cell phone records.
The police didn't know who this person was, so one of the detectives in the case decided to really just canvass the garage of the apartment complex to see if they could find a car from Mississippi. A lot of young people live in the area. We're close to D.C. A lot of people who only are in the D.C. area for a short period of time do live in Silver Spring. So the police thought, hey, maybe there was somebody from out of state that was here, and they were able to locate that car.
Tracing the license plate number reveals the name Katrina Ben, a woman who has recently moved into the building. With this information, the police are able to track her down and bring her in for an interview to ask her about her relationship with Eric.
So Katrina Ben was from Silver Creek, Mississippi. She was a very young, very attractive, very smart nurse. And by all accounts of people who knew her and previous employers, she was really good at what she did. Her patients really liked her. She ended up becoming a traveling nurse because she wanted to sort of see the country and see the world. And she was with a company that would staff her to 3-month sort of stints all around the country. So she moved very, very frequently, and she did get to do what she wanted. She got to see a lot of the country through her job.
She also was a very attractive young woman. Her families did have some concern, you know, as you might imagine, a young, attractive young woman who sort of a nomadic, moving around every 3 months from place to place. They had some concerns about that, but she loved it, and that's what she did. And she was apparently beloved by the patients that she cared for and had lots of close friends.
So Katrina and Eric actually met at the Viridian apartment. There was a community lounge on the 15th floor that was available to residents for parties and community functions. And during that time of the year was the NBA playoffs. And the apartment was organizing sort of playoff watch parties for the residents to go. She was wearing scrubs. He recognized her as a nurse. Eric was very entrepreneurial. He was always looking to kind of set up new companies, start a side hustle. And one of the things he was looking to do was start up a nursing staffing company. And she was also interested in that as well. So when he saw that she was in the healthcare field, they exchanged information related to potentially establishing a business relationship, but they also became quick friends as they were in this social group that was watching the NBA tournament.
That began a friendship that very, very quickly escalated into a sexual relationship between the two of them. During the 3 or 4 weeks, there were extensive text messaging that went back and forth between Eric and Katrina. And that text messaging began 3 or 4 weeks before, pretty benignly. Nice to meet you. Hey, handsome, how you doing? How's your day going? Very benign things. It became very easy to see the rapid escalation in the nature of the relationship simply by reading the text messages. And it rapidly became sexual, and they openly talked about it in their exchanges on the text messages. And coming up to the night of the murder, if you read the text messages, you realized that she was supposed to come over to his apartment that night to watch, they were both mutual NBA fans. They were supposed to come over to watch a game in the apartment that evening.
I'm a basketball fan, and so is he. So that was our connection. A game was coming on that night, and he was like, we can watch it.
On Monday, June 4th of 2012, Eric Samoa and Katrina Ben made plans to watch an NBA playoff game. And Katrina was supposed to come to Eric's apartment to watch that game. Eric and her hung out that evening, but she herself would say that Eric just was not attentive to her. He was making phone calls, he was paying bills, he was online checking his email, and he even took her at some point to go to a drug dealer's to buy some marijuana.
Sometime in the second quarter, he said, I did something real stupid a couple of days ago. And I was like, what? He said, I smoked some weed. Like, okay, whatever floats your boat. You know, I know people that smoke weed. I've never had any in my life. Feel free to take a blood sample, hair sample, whatever you need to do. I've never had any. I don't like to be around it, you know. And I kind of said something to that effect to him. I was kind of joking, but I was like, I work for the government. I ain't got time to be going down for no weed, you know. He was like, girl, please, I know somebody in the building, you know, I kind of want some. A few minutes later, he called someone, and he asked them 2 or 3 times, where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? And then he just hung up. I don't know if they hung up on him. I don't know. As
Katrina continues recounting the events of the night, this unknown person crops up again.
Beginning of the third quarter, he, I know this sounds so stupid, but for real, I just relate stuff to what quarter it was. Too, so you know, I don't know what time it was.
That would have been probably, the games usually last about 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking probably a little after 10.
Yeah,
10, 10:30 then.
So whoever this was, he was speaking code, but I'm not stupid.
Right.
I know what 420 is.
What was the...
You know, 420 is what I picked up on, but it was other I don't know what the hell he was saying. I'm not that cool. I don't know.
There absolutely was a contact between this marijuana dealer and Eric the night that he died. She went with him to the marijuana dealer's house, and they did buy drugs.
And she was able to give the police sort of very specific directions about the path they took to get to this drug dealer's house. Very detailed description of what he looks like, and she's able to describe the conversation between Eric and this drug dealer in great detail.
Eric and Katrina go back to his apartment after their drive. They watch the rest of the basketball game and eventually go to bed.
She is awoken in the night to hearing two men talking, and she recognizes that one of them is Eric, and she believes the other one of the men in the apartment is this drug dealer that she saw earlier. And she says she's sort of looking through a crack in the door, hearing this conversation.
When I woke up to him talking to somebody. And it was a guy. And he opened the bedroom door, he came in. And as he opened the door, I could see who I think is the guy from the apartment, like, walk by to go to the couch. So that's who he was talking to.
When Eric comes into the room to see Katrina, he has been smoking marijuana. She doesn't want to risk smelling like it herself and tells him she doesn't want to be near him.
And she kind of says she feels uncomfortable. She doesn't really know what's going on. She doesn't want to be there. So she decides to go through the closet exit for the bedroom out to the front door.
Can y'all just please tell me what happened?
Well, like I said, I think I told you that he was murdered. We still trying to put the timeline together, but obviously we thought you were one of the last people to have been with him. But now, you're telling us that when you left, this guy's with him.
Katrina's account of the night gives the police their first major suspect. But who is this supposed drug dealer? And can they find him before he kills again? Eric 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗱𝗿 is found murdered in his own bed, shot in the head with a .380. Police are able to get his phone records, revealing that he's been in close contact with Katrina Ben on the night of his murder. Katrina is brought in for questioning and explains that she isn't the last one to see Eric alive. She tells them that when she leaves his apartment, a drug dealer is there.
There were text messages that led them to a phone number, which led them to a cell phone location, and then an associated address. They ended up going to that associated address, and this drug dealer was arrested on unrelated drug charges.
We did a search warrant. The purported drug dealer owned a .380. Now, as you can imagine, based on the information coming from Katrina, that he was there when she left, knowing that he was shot with what appeared to be a .380, they thought, well, here it is. This is the murder weapon.
At this point, it looks like an open and shut case. The victim was killed by a .380. A witness places this man at the scene of the crime. This man even owns a .380.
He was interviewed. He absolutely adamantly denied being involved in the murder, and he flat out said, I've never been to his apartment, check my phone. And the police did. And never once could they put him through his phone at Eric's apartment.
The investigation into this man does not stop with phone records. The police continue to look into him, but as evidence continues to build, they are forced to concede that he could not have been involved.
And what we did, in fact, was through cell phone records, we found out where the drug dealer was at the time of the killing. We looked at the photo records and realized he never came into the building. We interviewed him and found out that, look, I don't even know where my customers live. I go to their houses. They come to me. Using the cartridge case, they were able to exclude the .380 as the gun that had fired the bullet that killed Eric And so the .380, even though he owned a .380, it was not the murder weapon. It was excluded as the murder weapon.
While the police rule out their prime suspect, Eric's funeral is held, and Katrina says her final goodbye with the rest of Eric's friends and family.
Katrina Benn attended Eric Samoa's funeral, and she sat front and center, and she grieved, and she was dressed to the nines, and I remember it was a black dress and heels. She mingled with the family, and she sent her condolences. When the investigation ran cold, the police did ultimately sort of turn back to Katrina. There were a lot of seasoned detectives on this case, and there were just a lot of little things that didn't add up. Some of her reactions were strange. Some of her reactions were inconsistent.
She became the focus in the investigation, mainly because of the text messages. Showed their relationship and showed that there was some tension in the relationship about him not really giving her the kind of attention she wanted, and even on the night of the murder, attempting to break the date before they actually did come to be together, ostensibly to watch some portion of an NBA basketball game.
On June 29, 2012, Katrina is approached at her building by police wearing a hidden recording device.
So at some point, the detectives decided to wear a recorder to go to her apartment to execute a search warrant. Unbeknownst to Katrina, that entire encounter was recorded, and police officers were talking to her throughout that search.
I shouldn't have to deal with this. I'm tired of it. This is what happens. Two and a half months of my life, and this is what I have to deal with. You know, Eric was a cool person. I had great times with Eric.
But also understand, I mean, he's dead.
To me,
he's dead.
Worth all this. He was not.
Obviously, I don't think that you killed him. But the only way I could tell my boss to kind of like leave you the hell alone is to say, we checked the computer, we checked the phone. She doesn't have a. Do you own a gun? Have you ever fired a gun? Do you have a?
Probably should have one.
Do you have a gun in your apartment? Anywhere here?
During that meeting, I think the officer's suspicions were heightened because at that point, she said, I wish this guy had killed me. And officers kind of were perplexed by that. And she said, it probably would be a lot more peaceful for me right now if he had just killed me instead of Eric. And the police were really baffled by that comment because it was just very cold, it was very calculating, and it was very different from the grieving kind of girlfriend that she wanted to portray at the beginning of the investigation.
Regardless of suspicions leaning toward Katrina, there is only evidence that she's with Eric that night and nothing to connect her to the actual murder. Because of this, the police instead put their focus on finding the murder weapon.
It might be a bit of a long shot, but at this point, the lead detective on the case begins looking at lost property, which might have been turned in since the date of the murder, with the hope that maybe a gun had been turned in.
So what actually happened was, at that time in 2012, any lost property that was found by the police, it simply was categorized as like one code, missing property. Didn't matter if it was a gun, didn't matter if it was a cell phone, didn't matter if it was a bicycle. So all that missing property just went into one code. So what Detective Rubin did was he pulled every single piece of missing property in those days after Eric Samoa's murder, and there ended up being, I think, like 58 reports. And the second to last report was a discarded .380 Lorsen that was found on the side of 495, not terribly far from Eric's apartment.
When Eric Samoa is murdered in his own bed, the only evidence as to who could be responsible are the ballistics found at the scene and the fact that his cell phone has gone missing. Cell phone records reveal that Katrina Benn is most likely the last person to see Eric alive. But there's nothing to connect her to the actual act. But the discovery of the .380 automatic Colt pistol could be a key to breaking the whole case.
The missing property report has an account of where and when the gun was found.
If anybody's ever been to Washington, D.C., you'll know that surrounding Washington is something we call the Beltway. It's an interstate highway. It's 4 to 8 lanes wide. In the early morning hours of June 5th, a paramedic who was driving to work on the Beltway, he was in almost dead stop traffic on the Beltway. He was in the far left lane. Paramedics looks out his window and he sees laying on the ground a handgun. He's dead stopped in the roadway. He thinks it's bizarre, but he gets out of his car, picks up the handgun, looks at it, and what he does, which is phenomenal, he immediately goes directly to the police station that's nearest to where he is. But also, this location is only a couple of minutes away from Eric's apartment and the apartment building where Katrina lives.
A gun of the right caliber found so close to Eric's building the morning after he's killed is too much of a coincidence to be ignored. But it's not enough. The investigators still need to find the gun's owner.
After the .380 was found on the side of the highway, the officers really did have their work cut out for them, because there is no national gun registration where you can simply take a firearm serial number and track every owner previously of that gun. The only ability for the detectives to do it is to do it by hand from owner to owner.
Turns out that that gun was originally sold in a town in Mississippi. Katrina Ben is from Mississippi. It was initially sold in a gun shop only a few miles away from her house. An interesting coincidence.
Each physical location, they had to access the physical piece of paper related to the gun, and they had to keep doing those steps, which included Mississippi, West Virginia. They had to go to several different places.
The detective goes down to Mississippi itself, and he begins to trace from gun shop to pawn shop to pawn shop how that gun changed hands, like 7 or 8 times. That gun was owned by various people.
I won't forget when Detective Rubin called me and he said, we finally got that last trace back. It's Katrina Ben's gun. After the gun was traced to Katrina, the detectives immediately got the arrest warrant for her and went down to Silver Creek, Mississippi, and arrested her at her parents' home, and then interrogated her in Mississippi for the murder. And that, quite frankly, was one of the most bizarre interrogations that I have ever seen.
You still think you didn't kill her? No. Okay. Do you own a firearm?
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of firearm do you own?
The .380.
Okay, why didn't you tell us that last time?
Because you never asked. I didn't kill anyone, so it's no need for me to say I have a gun. I mean, you never asked. You asked me, have you ever held a gun? Mm-hmm. Have you ever fired a gun?
Mm-hmm. And Detective Rubin said, no, that's not true. And she said, no, you asked me if I held a gun. And you asked me if I have ever fired a gun. And my answer to both of those were no. You never asked me if I owned a gun. And Detective Rubin's response was, I promise you we did.
Unfortunately for Katrina, the first time she is asked about owning a gun is recorded.
Do you own a gun? Have you ever fired a gun?
No.
Do you have
probably should have one.
What was so bizarre about that interrogation was, first of all, it was so long.
I mean,
she loves to talk about herself. And Katrina Ben will always think that she is the smartest person in the room. And she was going to admit to nothing, but she told her life story. The most interesting part of the story she told was why, when she finally admitted that she owned a gun. And it was because she had 11 stalkers throughout her life.
Think of me as just a regular person. Listen, I'm not a detective. I'm listening to the story.
You told me I said I didn't remember buying it. I just told you I bought it in 03, 04.
No, I said you remember buying it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm just a regular person listening to this story, right?
Right.
If I don't have an explanation right now, and it happened before on cases with me, I'll walk away thinking you're basically a cold-blooded killer. I've been in homicide 4.5 years. You're one of the best people I had to deal with, not just like smart-wise, but just, you're very polite. You tell a good story. I tell a good story.
Katrina refuses to admit to the crime at all. But by this point, there's enough evidence that a case is built around the perceived events of the night of the murder.
This was not a loving relationship. The investigation seems to reveal she did not know that. I think she felt her status was significantly more profound with him than it actually, in fact, was. And apparently there was at least one occasion where she saw him out with another woman. So this was beginning to build. And, if you read the text messages on the night that Eric died, you can see a lot of frustration because even on the night he died, he tried to break the date, but she wouldn't stand for him breaking the date.
What we were then later able to discover through the investigation was before Katrina came down to Eric's apartment. Through her key fob, her movement was recorded that night. She left her apartment, she went to her car, she came back into the apartment building and then down to Eric's apartment. And that's where we believe that she retrieved the gun. Katrina Ben, again, in her own statement, says that she then woke up at about 5 in the morning and she wanted to see what time it was. So she looked at his phone. The phone that was never recovered. And we believe at that point that she accessed the phone and was able to see that Eric was out with several different women, sometimes more than one woman on the same night of the week. And that was Katrina, with her earlier statement, nobody plays me that way.
I will tell you, the nature of the relationship she envisioned is not the nature of the relationship he envisioned. The reality is that Eric had a long-standing relationship with another woman who'd been dating for about a year. The next morning, she went to her car, not dressed for work, left her apartment, went someplace, came back a half hour later, walked back into her apartment, nothing in her hand. She later on claimed that she got gas, checked her credit. She bought gas by credit card. She didn't buy any gas. But if you drove from her apartment, drove down the block and got on the Beltway, because the entrance to the Beltway, where the gun is found, is down the end of her street, and then just sort of looped around and came back to the apartment, it would take you almost precisely and exactly 1/2 hour. She left her apartment with the handgun, went down the street, threw it out on the Beltway, came back to her apartment, armed with the information that she was no longer in possession of the murder weapon.
Katrina could tell you everything. She could tell you where she placed a wine glass. She could tell you the exact route they took to the drug dealer's house. But she couldn't remember when she last saw her gun, where she last had it, or where she put it. And for a woman who was so cunning about all these details and so exacting about all these details, it was very easy for the jury not to buy that part of her story.
Oh, you can think what you want to think, and you can stop talking to me right now.
It's not about that. It's about science and common sense.
Yeah, you can keep talking. Go ahead.
You want a lawyer? Is that what you're saying to us?
That's fine.
We'll walk away.
Yeah, bye.
We'll walk away.
Bye. All right. Thanks for the visit. Nice seeing you.
At this point, the evidence is sufficient that even without a confession, there's more than enough evidence to place Katrina Ben under arrest.
She was arrested on June the 21st, 2013, slightly a little bit more than a year after the killing.
Eric Samoa is found dead in his apartment on June 6, 2012, believed to be killed 2 days earlier. After a year-long investigation, with little more than ballistic forensics to lean on, Katrina Ben is arrested on June 21st, 2013.
Our case for Katrina Ben was a very circumstantial case, but we felt that it was a strong circumstantial case, which is why we were comfortable bringing the case. And in Maryland, the law makes no distinction about the weight that you can give to direct evidence versus circumstantial evidence. And the biggest piece of circumstantial evidence we had in our case was the gun. Once that gun was found, Katrina was charged. And then once she was charged, based on the legwork regarding that gun, we were comfortable prosecuting her.
Even without confirmation that Katrina's gun must have been used to kill Eric, the evidence that it could have been used is too much to ignore.
We did recover a bullet from Eric's body, as I mentioned earlier. The bullet became deformed upon entering his body. It was mangled. It was not suitable for comparison purposes uniquely to her handgun because of the deformities that were present in the bullet that was recovered.
There were a lot of coincidences that the jury was going to have to believe that that gun was not the murder weapon. Because Katrina Ben was the last person to see Eric Samoa alive. We could prove that. We could prove it was her gun. So you would have to believe that someone else used Katrina Ben's gun to kill someone she knew. And they did that within hours of her leaving Eric Samoa's apartment. And then they took her gun and threw it on the side of the highway sometime between the day Eric was killed and 2 days later when it was discovered. That area of the highway is only about a 20-minute drive from the apartment. And Katrina did what we call the trip to nowhere. She left her apartment. She left without her cell phone. She was gone for exactly 1/2 an hour. She returned to the apartment. She picked up her cell phone, and then she went to work, and she was able to make it to work on time. In Maryland, motive is not an element of the offense, but the jury can consider a motive or lack of motive as a reason to convict or acquit. And juries, they want motives, quite frankly. And that was a very hard part of the case for us. But when you looked at the text messages and you looked at the time frames and you looked at how that relationship between Eric and Katrina soured, the motive was sort of the oldest motivation in the book, right? Jealousy and a scorned lover. That is ultimately the motive that we put forth to the jury. In Maryland, it's always the defendant's right to speak last. She spoke at her case, and she turned directly to Eric's family and spoke and denied it all and said she loved him. And that was like a spectacle. The family lost their minds. They ran out of the courtroom. We waited till she was done speaking, and then Detective Rubin kind of ushered everybody back in. The final verdict in the case was that Katrina was guilty on all counts. The jury convicted her of first-degree premeditated murder, and they convicted her of use of a firearm during the commission of a felony or violent crime.
She got the most profound punishment you can get under the law in my state, life without possibility of parole.
What we said to the judge at sentencing, and I think what is still true today, is this was not a crime of necessity. This was a cold and calculated murder simply because of a slight that this woman felt. Eric didn't take her out. He didn't show her off. He didn't take her to nice dinners, and he didn't call her when she wanted to be called. And that is the sorriest reason ever to take someone's life. Katrina is not someone that can be rehabilitated because there was no necessity for her crime. She killed simply because she felt slighted. And in that case, there's no telling what she would kill over again.
Eric was a good guy. He was a fun guy. He was considerate. He was, by most people's standards, pretty wealthy guy. He was generous. I think he was generous to his friends. He was generous to his family. Obviously, this was catastrophic to them. Eric's family, this was an immigrant family. Eric's mom and dad immigrated to the United States. So this was an American success story. Eric was an immigrant family success story that any family could be proud of, and this family was enormously proud of Eric.
Eric's family was very appreciative for the work that the state's attorney's office and the police department put into solving Eric's case. It was not an easy road, and it was not a straight line, and the case was cold for a while. But the family was very satisfied, I do believe, with the verdict in the case. It is truly a case where everybody that was assigned to that case, I do believe, was in the exact right place at the exact right time to hold her accountable. It really was a team effort between the prosecution, between the police department, the forensics teams. She was so smart. She was so calculating. And there are just so many things that could have happened in a different way.
that would have left her out of the picture. If Detective Rubin had never thought to look for that Mississippi license plate, the very next day she would have moved to Baltimore and potentially no one would have found her. If Brad Shoemaker hadn't looked over on the side of the road and turned that gun in, it might have been destroyed forever. There were just so many little pieces on that case that had to come together to get justice for Eric.
I think the families of these people, look, if you have a dead son, brother, loved one, they're still dead. I think justice is served to the extent that the person who did this was a cold, calculating execution. I think it was a magnificent police investigation, and we had the benefit of a good Samaritan giving us that gun. So justice is served in the sense that the person who did this killing is in jail for killing him. Still doesn't take away the pain from the family.